Why is UK infrastructure so expensive? Why does it cost more here than virtually anywhere in the world to build, construct big infrastructure going forward? That's a real puzzle. We have really big infrastructure ambitions, and so the answer on costs really matters. We want to build 1.5 million homes. We want to do net zero electricity by 2030. We want to completely upgrade the water sewage system in the UK. We want to do HS2 from London to Birmingham. We want to build nuclear power stations. We want a major expansion of the airports. Oh, and then we want to build loads of data centres and all the supporting infrastructure to go with these. These are really big projects, each in their own domain, but combined together, this requires a big push in the UK away from what we might call business as usual. And if it costs as much as it's currently costing to do construction in the UK, it's basically never going to happen. Just let's remind ourselves what sort of numbers there are around this cost issue. Let's take nuclear power stations. They are here about the most expensive in the world to build, and in some cases by an order of magnitude. It costs 40 to 50 billion to produce a twin reactor, so 3.2 gigawatts of power. Two big twin nuclear reactors, Hinkley plus Sizewell, are going to cost probably more than the entirety of the bloated budget for the full HS2. Railways. Well, where do you start? How can it be the case that building a railway from now what is London, brackets possibly, maybe Oak Common, to Birmingham is going to cost $750 million a mile? Who knows, it might end up being $1 billion a mile. You think, how could you possibly spend so much per mile on a railway line? But if nuclear and rail are expensive, let's just think about the great airport expansion. What is it going to cost to have another runway at Heathrow? This is a runway, right? Now, it doesn't help if you want to build it over the top of one of the busiest bits of motorways in Britain. But this could cost 30, 40, some people even say 60 billion pounds for a runway. And we can add a lot more to that. How does it cost so much to build a tank at a sewage works to store more stormwater? How can a reservoir cost this much? Now, there are lots of other examples, and some things don't cost that much. So we have two examples, both in London, of where the costs arguably are reasonable and pretty internationally competitive. They are the Queen Elizabeth line, which is a triumph of engineering, a bit over budget, a bit late, but not much. And we have the Thames Tideway, which has been delivered in an effective and efficient way. But these are the exceptions, not the rule. And in both cases, it's a regulatory policy side of it, which has been crucial. In the case of the Elizabeth line, that's supported by essentially the London Mayor, public sector, and in the Thames Tideway, Thames customers are already paying for a lot of that pay-as-you-go and the process along the way. What we learned from those couple of projects, the Queen Elizabeth line and the Thames Tideway, is that there's nothing inevitable about British costs being, or UK costs being so high. But they are, and they're staggeringly high. So why? What's causing all this? Well, first up is the cost of capital. These are all intensely capital-intensive projects. And as capital-intensive projects, if you double cost of capital, you massively increase the overall cost. We have gone from a world where the real interest rate was effectively negative, and then after with COVID and after, say, 222, we moved to what I would regard as a more normal world where the real interest rate is positive. UK particularly positive, although that high real interest rate is being eroded by having particularly high inflation. The UK has twice the nominal interest rate of Europe, and it has twice the inflation. Well, that's bound to be pretty costly. When it comes to labour costs, in one sense, our workers don't earn that much by international comparators. But then the productivity is stunningly low. And what's more, as it gets downgraded going into the autumn budget by the OBR, that productivity problem is not just a construction industry characteristic, but it's at the core of our difficulties, because it's both sides of the productivity equation. It's the cost of labour and it's the output of labour, their productivity. Put those two things together and the UK is not a particularly good place to do this stuff, and especially if you cut off what was a supply of pretty good, particularly European immigrant labour to support the construction industry as it did the hospitality industry. If you cut that off as well, if you increase national insurance charges in your so-called growth budget of autumn 2024, if you ramp up the minimum wage, and if you then change workers' rights to give new and powerful rights to workers, all of those things impact. The cost of capital plus the cost of labour is the starting point of this. And our cost of capital is particularly high, both because of the way in which our macroeconomics are run, but also because for the regulated parts of infrastructure industries, and most of them ultimately depend upon regulated utilities to pay for this stuff, that's a world in which we've tried to play pay when delivered, and we've tried to put construction risk as much as possible into the private sector rather than share it with customers, and the result is very high cost of capital. Hinkley's at a staggering 8 to 9%. And if you think about the lump of capital that a nuclear power station is, that's a project killer. And it requires smart regulation, proper risk sharing characteristics, predictable regulation going forward, and a framework within regulation which allows for a bit of optimization of that cost of capital. And it's really noticeable that we in the UK particularly don't use the state's balance sheet to do much of this stuff if we can possibly avoid it. Other countries are smarter when it comes to the relationship in the state and infrastructure investment. But in addition to all of this, labour and capital costs, etc., which are, the primary building blocks of the cost of construction, there are other considerations. If you look at how we do construction in this country, and if you look at how we organise contracts and the tendering for those contracts, there are some glaringly obvious reasons why we end up with this extraordinary cost of total infrastructure development. One is that it's a very UK feature that we like discrete contracts, one at a time, and we like those contracts to focus on the minimum bid prices rather than the content and the investment in the supply chain and the skills of all the other component parts. That wouldn't matter too much if the state was providing the education, training, skills and support systems that any infrastructure frame needs. I mean, if you think about building 1.5 million houses over the lifetime of the Parliament, rather than the paltry number we're currently building, you do need plumbers, you do need electricians, you do need brickies, and you do need people with modern AI and digital skills to design, implement, and modularize production. That isn't going to be provided overwhelmingly by the private sector. You actually need people leaving universities, leaving technical training, going out into the workforce, into apprenticeships with substantive state support. Much of that in the UK is missing. Then there's the modular bit itself. What we do is we give a contract. Now, let's give a contract to Hinkley to build a nuclear power station. Let's see if it works. And if it turns out to be okay, well, maybe we'll give another contract. Let's call it Sizewell. This is no way to go about a nuclear programme. Either you want a nuclear programme or you don't. And the word is programme, not individual power stations. France built 53, 56 nuclear reactors. At one stage, 6 at one time. That enabled investment by the constructing companies, by the state, and by the core utility EDF in the whole supporting infrastructure around building this stuff. And we have not got that supply chain for nuclear. We've invented a bit more of it at Hinkley. But you know what? If we just do Sizewell and think, oh, well, look, let's give it another 5-10 years and think, well, they'll build another one after that. That is no way to put a supply chain together. Many of the people who've been working at Hinkley will be retired by the time, left the labour force by the time we get round to a third PWR, if we ever do. The UK approach was, well, let's try 4 different kinds of nuclear reactor and see which one works. And the result has been we're trying one, and now we're going to build a second one of that. And roll this forward to the nuclear challenge going forward. The excitement of the time is all about small modular reactors, SMRs. And the argument is that these should be made in factories in batch production. Well, almost all of everything to do with nuclear power stations is built in factories anyway, so don't get too carried away about the production line. But do take the modular bit seriously. It's no good saying, I tell you what, look, let's have a competition and let's see if we could build one of these small modular reactors or possibly 2. Oh, and let's give it to Rolls-Royce to lead this frame. You know, actually what you want is either a contract for 10 or 0, because gearing up to produce a production line, that production line to produce one SMR after another is a completely different cost proposition from let's try 2 and see if they work, minimise the cost of the budget, of course. The contractors are going to come along and get a contract to build or help build 1 or 2, and then they won't want to invest in the full expertise, knowledge, systems, IT, etc., to be geared up to doing lots of SMRs if they don't know if there's any more coming down the track. Now, I've laboured that point on nuclear, but it's true of all of these areas. We don't have commitment to programs of infrastructure. We have discrete one as you go and see if it works. And that's of the essence of why we are where we are. So if you think that we're going to grow our economy by rebuilding our infrastructure, and we sure do, then it's got to be done at a cost which ultimately you and me can afford to pay in our bills and through our taxes. And the way we're going about it at the moment is going to make it very expensive, and the result will be that not much of it will be delivered. That will be a tragedy, but it's a tragedy well in the making, and it's a very British tragedy in front of us. Doesn't need to be like that. Let's try and make sure it isn't. Thank you.